Hi, I'm Norman Kuntz, and I'll be your host in this video as we explore the issue of inclusive education. That is, the principles and practices of supporting students with disabilities in regular classes in the neighborhood schools. In my own life, I went to a segregated school for disabled students from kindergarten until grade 7. Then, at the age of 13, I argued my way into a regular junior high school. I then went on to do an undergraduate degree and a master's degree in family therapy. There is absolutely no question that my inclusion into a regular school provided me with the academic background that enabled me to enter university, but it also gave me the social skills that allowed me to successfully interact with others at school, at university, at workplaces, and in the general community. But does it make sense to include students with more significant disabilities into regular classrooms in their neighborhood schools? That's the question this video will explore. Over the last year, I've talked with numerous scholars, educators, parents, and advocates about this issue. What follows is a compilation of these discussions.
I mean, the basic premise of special education was that children with deficits were going to benefit from a unique body of knowledge, smaller classes, staffed by specially trained teachers who use special materials. And I got to be honest with you, that seemed to make perfect sense to me. But, you know, about 10 years into doing mainstream or integration, people started to question that. Part of the reason I think it doesn't work is that you have lowered expectations for children in segregated environments. You take away academic models, behavior models, communication models. You are communicating to children that they're not worthy, that they don't belong. So you're lowering self-esteem and motivation. So I think it's a vicious cycle that takes you down instead of taking you up.
A lot of people won't use the word segregation, right? They'll call it specialized or congregated, and that, you know, that there's a small ratio and all that stuff. But we didn't find it specialized at all. We called it segregated from the beginning, and I think it's really important that people do that.
Obviously, we're teaching that student that you belong somewhere else, that you don't belong with everyone else. We're teaching that student that you belong in a special environment, in a separate environment, and that we don't believe that you can function and be successful in an ordinary environment.
Since the 1940s and 50s, school districts throughout North America and the world have set up and operated segregated special education classrooms in schools. And I think that many people believe because these classrooms in schools were so pervasive that they must have educational merit. But is this actually true? Is the very premise of segregated special education fundamentally flawed? Does it go against common sense?
Well, honestly, it frustrates me tremendously that our country hasn't made more progress in this area, because we know from 30 years of research, we know that kids with disabilities who are included in general education have better academic outcomes, social outcomes, higher education outcomes, employment, behavior, everything across the board. There's no studies that suggest that kids with segregated educational experiences do better. But I think in some ways, in some districts, it's the path of least resistance to just go with what we've been doing for decades.
As a teacher, I saw that the quality of segregated programs generally was not comparable at all to regular education.
We didn't see what the point was of putting all the kids with disabilities, with educational challenges in one place. And that was particularly true for Matthew, who was gaining a lot of communication skills through technology and other things. All of a sudden started to show us potential that we hadn't even seen before without technology. He wanted to learn academics, and he was in a school where that wasn't happening. So it just didn't make sense.
The local segregated school in Toronto, we look at it now, and the children in that school are taken out of the school a lot. They walk around the neighborhood, they go for group walks, they're all holding hands. That is a sort of skill and activity that families do together. It's not educational.
I realized that my compartment of special education was becoming a barrier. And what we do in special education is just a level of support that we're offering to kids that anyone can have. And the more you do it, and the more you move from special education to inclusive education to just education, you realize that the goal is the same for everybody. We want kids to be successful. And if we can kind of break down some of those barriers, I think, and have more of a common goal, we'll start to have a more common way to get to our common vision. And it's less about us and them and you and me and this and that, and more about, here's our kids. How are we teaching and responding to this group of kids? Not in spite of their diversity, but because of their diversity, and responding to what makes them unique in this ecology that makes them them.
One of the central concerns about inclusive education is that students with disabilities will sacrifice the opportunity to learn life skills by being in regular classrooms.
If we're teaching life skills in a special setting, then we're teaching children how to essentially function in one specific environment, as though they're always going to spend their life in a separate environment. If we want kids to learn life skills that they can generalize and use in all environments, then they need to be out in life in all the environments they're going to be in. So first of all, it doesn't make any sense, because we take the kids who might have some of the greatest trouble generalizing skills across environments, and we keep them in only one, as though that's going to teach them functional skills. So I think that part is just sort of baffling. I mean, Maggie needs to learn how to live and function in all of the different environments that life happens in. And the people around her, her community, her classmates, her peers, her friends, need to learn how to support her and function in all of these different environments too. So of course she has to be where life happens.
There's a lot of people that ask me about life skill instruction, kind of that explicit instruction around daily living skills. And I think that there can still be a role for that, but I'm drawn back to a conversation I had with a parent once. And I remember her son was coming into grade 8, and she looked at me and she said, "Shelley, my son will be in school here for the next 5 years. And then he has like 60 years where I can teach him how to do laundry and make sandwiches. I cannot teach him science, I cannot teach him math, I cannot teach him phys ed. I want him to be in classes with his peers because this time is so valuable. That's what I want the focus of his education to be." And I just looked, and I never forgot that, because, families, we forget that families also have a role in developing life skills, and it's in a more accessible goal because we do it every day, but parents don't teach science every day. And so I think sometimes we look at public education as a really valuable, but also a limited part of people's lives, where this is the opportunity to expose kids to things that are cool and interesting that then guide them on to later years of their life.
Skills that are taught in isolation that are not necessarily being used at the time, or you don't have a functional purpose for why am I learning this, right. Which all students ask that question sometimes. When am I ever going to use this? How does this matter in my life?
The problem with segregation is misplaced objectives and a misplaced vision, in my mind, that you're thinking that if I can remediate this person, I can get them ready for society, whereas we need to turn that around to say, how do we make society inclusive for everyone? And if you begin with this person needs to be cured, you'll go to segregation and you'll stay in a segregated, isolated environment. If you start from the premise that this person isn't broken, this person doesn't need to be cured, this person has a contribution to make, that leads you to an inclusive environment.
It's interesting, following up on that about student skills, because as a teacher, a retired teacher, I recognized that students learn as much from other students as they do from the teachers. And in fact, even young students have superior skills in some areas than the teacher who is teaching them. And the school that Matthew was sent to was called a communications class, where there were 8 students, none of whom communicated. How much could they learn about communication from each other? Very little. The weakness is they only had the teacher to learn from. Instead of having 9 people to learn from, they had 1. In a regular class, they would have had however many other students were in the class who communicated to learn from.
If you believe that inclusive education provides better educational and social opportunities to students with disabilities, then what's the next step?
I think there are first generation and second generation inclusion questions. And the first generation inclusion question is, can this child be included? Where a second generation question is, how do we make it work? Yeah. You already assume the child is going to be there.
Just bringing kids physically together was not the goal. And I can acknowledge that that was the first step, but in order for it to move from just a physical place where we're breathing the same air to a community where people are choosing to engage and learn from each other, like there was something that was missing. And just in research and in reading, I kind of uncovered 3 big kind of purposes that all kids have, not just kids with disabilities, but all kids have and are trying to negotiate in any space that they're in, whether it's a classroom or not. The 3 purposes that kind of uncovered themselves were having a personal purpose, having a social purpose, and having an intellectual purpose. And what I really liked about those is that kids, when they were going into classes with their peers, a lot of their purposes were just social, and which is an important component, but the other kids had more to negotiate than that. And I mean, some of the classes that they were in were 70 minutes long, and that's a really long time to just have behavioral and social goals, right? And if we wanted them to learn together, I found it really important to also incorporate intellectual goals for these kids so they can start learning together and have goals that were the same, not the same, but like around a big idea. And so that was kind of the guiding framework that we used when we were bringing kids together in classes was, kids with and without disabilities, to really try and structure all of the places that we're in as having these 3 guiding purposes, so that any goals we created with those 3 lenses in mind.
So Matthew went to regular public school with his brother and sister, and went to regular high school with his brother and sister. And that turned out to be so phenomenally valuable because the siblings were connected. There were struggles with Matthew in regular elementary school and regular high school, undeniable. However, those struggles were absolutely nothing in a negative sense compared to the positive gain of having the 3 siblings connected all their lives.
So Samuel has always been included in general ed. He has no other experience. He's never been segregated. And I think that did many things. First of all, it made us as a family feel welcome in our school and community. And that was a really empowering thing. It made me want to stay connected to the school and volunteer. But it also made Samuel feel like he had an incredible network of peers and teachers that believed in him, that had high expectations for him. And so that gave him a confidence that I don't think he would have had otherwise. He's now navigating the world with a sense, I belong. I don't belong on the outskirts. I belong right in the middle of the action. And so I think that had a tremendous impact on him. It had an impact on us. And his older brother, Isaiah, I think Samuel's differences and his disability would have been a lot more difficult for Isaiah to integrate into his life if he had seen Samuel simultaneously, because of those differences, being ostracized, being bullied, being segregated. But because he saw Samuel as being happy, engaged, with lots of friends, learning the same curriculum that he learned when he was a kid, that helped Isaiah accept the fact that his brother, is not a typical kid and a typical brother in some ways, but has so much love and value and has such a strong place in our community and our family.
There was a student that I worked with who was in grade 2, and we supported him to be included more in his classroom over time. And he did great. He started with 5 meaningful minutes, and we got him up to like about 80% of the day through that year, and it was a really great success story. And I was sharing the story, and a teacher came up to me and said, "This is a great story, but look at all of the supports that one kid got. Like, isn't that, like, that's a lot of support for one kid. What about the other 29? So I was doing readings, and I'm like, okay, well, there's lots of, there's research that talks about the benefits of diversity of ability in classrooms. But then I realized that I needed to find this out for myself. So I went into the class, and I interviewed every single one of the other kids in the class. And I asked them 4 questions. I said, how is this student a part of your class? What are some things you do together? What would it be like if he wasn't here? And what have you learned from him? Now they're 7, so I was expecting like, we play together, I'm so lucky because sometimes I get to use his iPad. And I just remember this one particular interview that I have that I show people, and there's these 2 girls, and they're 7. And I remember them just saying, what their classmate had taught them was that, you don't have to be the same, that everyone learns in different ways, that everyone belongs in the world. And, I'm thinking to myself, how else would you teach those concepts to a 7-year-old? Because I've been to bookstores. There's no read aloud that explains those concepts in a way that would be internalized like that. And so I think part of this is really about, like, you can't teach this. You cannot teach those concepts. You have to live those concepts. And the contribution that this boy had to his classroom was actually a really, like, cheap way to teach that to kids. Like, let's put 10 times more money towards these kids because they are teaching things that we can't. And their contributions that they have are concepts that these kids are going to carry with them into adulthood and turn them into adults, which are going to be in society, the society that we want.
And I think the longer I've been working on this, the more I get frustrated that I think we talk about inclusion, about its benefits, or segregation around its benefits and its drawbacks for individual students. We can talk about Maggie individually and the best environments for her and what she most needs, but we've got to look at the larger picture. Our society cannot afford to segregate people anymore because we don't even know what we're missing. We are, as a society, we are incomplete and we don't even see the absence.
There's so much education that goes on that is not ever charted or put into a number of some kind.
On the other hand, though, Matthew did do a lot of academic learning in those settings. Surprised us, surprised a lot of people, and was a real source of celebration in the classroom. For example, when the first time he read aloud in class, and he was very excited to finally in grade 8 get spelling tests because he excelled at that. And meanwhile, they were checking, in a special ed way, did he recognize letters and numbers? And he'd get really frustrated when they do that with him because he was spelling hieroglyphics when they were learning about Egypt, and he got really frustrated with people doubting him, and loved the situation where he could just move along with everybody else.
Learning happens, according to things like self-determination theory, when students feel related and connected to other people, when they know they're part of a community. They learn when they feel autonomous in their learning, that they have some control over their learning. So those 2 things have to be in place. They have to feel competent to learn what's in front of them. They have to feel smart. The challenge in front of them has to be a doable one. And when those 3 things are in place, we know from decades of research on things like self-determination theory that students learn. So we could just trust that if we put that foundation in place, that students are learning, and we could just go from there.
It's a gift that children who are different bring to the system too. Because as long as we can send away everyone who challenges the status quo, it never changes. So that the most diverse classes that we see are the classes that I think work the best for all kinds of kids, because the teachers are broadening the range of accommodations, modifications. So the presence of children who learn differently, who are at different rates, different levels, I think is beneficial to everybody in the classroom.
What's happening right now, and I think why people are panicking, is because all of the supports that we do right now are retrofit design. And they're not even design, they're just retrofit reactions. And we're panicking because we're like, there's not enough money, there's not enough support, there's not enough all these things. But if we just stopped for a second and instead asked, how can we design better? Or how do we do this better from the start? And there's a toy, I don't know if you remember it. It's timeless, so you should be okay. But it's like that rocker ring. It is made by Fisher-Price, and it's all those rings that you put on, and it rocks around. It's different colors. Yeah. I love this because I think about it was, you know, which ring do you put on first?
The biggest.
The big one. You put that one on first, and then you put on the next one, and all the way up to the top. Which one's the most difficult to put on?
The small one.
The small one.
It rocks back.
Totally, and you have to be really accurate, and it's at the top. And so I think about this, like, what if all of those rings represented all of the ability levels in a classroom? Because that's pretty much what we're dealing with, right? Is we're dealing with kids from all different abilities and backgrounds and experience levels, and we have to kind of manage this as a person. So I think to myself, well, what do? When we teach, we aim for the middle, right? That's what we do. So let's think about that in terms of the ring. So say we started in the middle. If you start in the middle, and we put the ring on in the middle, which ring can we put on next?
The small one.
And then?
Yeah.
And then, so you can put on, you can go up. But then what happens to the bottom rings?
You can't get
You
it.
can't go backwards. So then we say, well, this ring can go with the support EA, and this ring can go to the resource teacher, and this ring we'll just hope doesn't come to school today. And so we're sitting here running out of places to send these kids, rather than just being like, if we just start at the biggest ring, everyone can fit. But it's about starting in a new place, not trying to go back and force it on afterwards, because there's not enough money in the world to do that. But there is enough money in the world to design better. And so I think what teachers can do is really take a step back and be like, what is my entry point? So that all my kids can start together. And rather than trying to get everyone to end in the same place, let's start together and kids decide where they go.
The common thread in all of these conversations is this. Inclusive education is about opportunity. Whether it's the opportunity for disabled students to make friends or demonstrate that they're more intelligent than they're assumed to be, for their non-disabled peers to be more comfortable about disability, or for educators to expand their instructional practices so they can better address the learning differences of all their students. Inclusive education offers the opportunity to make schools better for everyone. So inclusive education is not simply the politically correct thing to do. It is a liberating act of social justice. Inclusive education has the ability to transform schools, to truly make them communities of mutual respect and support. Thanks for watching.
And there's a toy, I don't know if you remember it. It's timeless, so you should be okay. But it's like that rocker ring. It is made by Fisher-Price, and it's all those rings that you put on, and it rocks around. It's different colors. I love this because